Okay.
Okay. Between 1939 and 1942, because of the parkways nearing completion, interest in the area again picked up, and lots were sold by Miller and Bowie. Uh, for a short period, it started to regain some of its resort popularity. But the Second World War broke out and brought the resort and development idea to a complete end. As you know, there was gas rationing. Most of our men were overseas. There was very little tourism during that period. So the inn actually ceased to exist as an inn. Because of all of these problems, Bowie lost interest in the inn, and he let it become a hotel and a community center until his death in 1946. In 1946, his son inherited Bowie's share of the development company. He and Miller reached an agreement in that Miller assumed ownership of all the land held by the company, while Tom Bowie kept the inn. During the next 12 years, the inn was a rundown boarding house. Then, in 1958, Tom Bowie decided to restore it. Between 1958 and 1960, he spent over $60,000 in the restoration and furniture and fixtures and renamed the inn the General Adams Inn. It, however, never opened. Tom Bowie was a victim of the same genetic disease which ran in the Bowie family, which was some form of neurosis, and he went mad and in a fit of rage sold everything inside the inn one day on a moment's notice and left it empty until his death, which I believe was in 1961. During the period it was empty, it was pretty much stripped of everything through vandalism, and some damage was done to the inside. Upon his death, a man named Herman Richardson bought it from the Bowie estate and then sold it and with the intent to reopen it as an inn. However, he was struck by a severe heart attack and was physically not up to the task. So in 1968 he sold it to Mrs. Jessie Andrews, who in turn sold it to us in 1976. During her period of her ownership, she used the place, and Richardson used the place, strictly as a private residence. We bought it in 1976, as I mentioned before, in November, and for 6 months we spent all of our time and efforts in restoration of the first floor and the kitchen facilities and the exterior. In the winter of 1977-78, we restored the second and third floors of the structure. In December of 1980, we in turn sold the inn to Ms. Gail Winston. We operated the inn for 4 years, and during that time operated it as a restaurant and craft center, not open to the public for lodging. The economic situation in 1979 with the gas crisis hit our part of the country pretty hard, so we were forced to, in essence, close it down in 1979 to active public business, and were forced to put it up for auction in the fall of 1980. And that's it.
Well, that has a colorful history, doesn't it?
It
Really,
does.
it really does. As you said, it was responsible for getting us Blue Ridge Parkway.
Well,
in a
it
roundabout
is,
way.
in a pretty much of a direct way. The state did a lot of digging into that aspect of it. They didn't include it in the final brief to the National Historic Site people because it tended to besmirch the image of Robert Doden, who was a tremendous figure in American politics during the 20s and 30s and 40s. Very powerful man and a very capable one. And they thought it best, since there was more than sufficient reasons to make it a national historic site without those references, to include it. its unique architectural structure. The Queen Anne design is very rare, as I said before. The building is built on what they call a mobile pedestal, which is a series of huge oak slabs which are mounted on slate in the ground. It was done this way. We found out that there was a significant earthquake in South Carolina, North Carolina around the turn of the century, and Bowie contracted with an English engineer and architect to try to build something that would not collapse under an earthquake. He put it on this really, it's a mobile foundation, which was the man's recommendation for allowing the building to move with the land instead of being on a fixed foundation. Apparently it's worked. We've had several minor little shakes and everything over the years, but there's no evidence of any settling or anything in the structure. There have been dozens and dozens of minor renovations over the years by Bowie and by D.W. Adams, the original builder. It's been used for many, many things. It's just a fascinating place. And because of that, the state decided to exclude all of the historical reference to the parkway. But based on what we've been able to find and what the state garnered from the congressional record, the rumors about Doughton's efforts on behalf of the parkway and the inn, it seems to be true. But in the event that it is not true, there would be we wouldn't want to besmirch his memory. But it's a fascinating place.
Well, if one had the old congressional records, I have not read them. It'd be interesting to get a copy.
I don't think we've got them. I think the state sent them to us and asked us to return them. My memory serves me correctly.
It is in an excellent spot, and there's so much traffic along the parkway. It would seem that it would have a lot of potential.
Well, it does. It's had we been able to get financing, which we were unable to do, we had to finance it ourselves. Proper financing, we would have been able to make it. We need it. It takes normally, when you set up a restaurant, about 4 years to break even, and we were ahead of our anticipated pace after 2 years. But the gas crisis, which cut in half the tourist traffic on the parkway pretty much, really just destroyed everything. We didn't have the capital to keep going. But there's an interesting phenomenon about the inn. The inn is one of the reasons why we couldn't get financing, one of the main reasons, is the inn is looked upon in the county, particularly that part of the county, as jinxed. Every individual who's ever owned it has died an unusual death.
Is there?
And and this or has been afflicted with severe illness. I'm not certain of D.W. Adams, the nature of his death, but I understand he was in severe amount of pain from it. His wife suffered severely in her later years from illness and eventually had a nervous breakdown. His daughter, named Rosebud, was murdered in the inn, and her ghost supposedly walks the stairs. And I have heard footsteps in the building, of a woman's footsteps.
Is there?
Yeah, and she supposedly haunts the place. Tam Bowie lost his mind before his death. His son lost his mind before his death. Mr. Richardson suffered a massive heart attack right after he purchased the inn. Mrs. Andrews suffered from a heart attack, diabetes, all shortly after she purchased the inn. So far, my wife and I are the only ones who haven't suffered any real serious physical illness from it. But it has developed a reputation of being jinxed, and it sounds silly, that people would believe it, but we've had bankers tell us that image of the inn is one that it'll never make it because it is jinxed.
Is that right?
See, it was built before Old Ford, or right about the same time, yet it never quite made it in the same league. It never, despite all the efforts and the political pull and everything else of Tamboui and Doughton and all these people, it never became the major center, the focal point of a major resort area. And
And it really had potential.
Has the potential, an awful lot of it. And they had the property, the land, the subdivision. It was far better organized development than Asheville was in the beginning. But it never quite made it. Number of reasons for it, aside from just the jinx concept, the railroad problem. Railroads were not really into Ashe County in as convenient a way as they were in Asheville and Charlotte, that type of thing. But that's basically the story in the end.
Did it bother you or your family about the ghost situation?
No, not really. We had a number of odd things happen to us, and a number of odd things take place in the inn. One evening, shortly after we opened, there were 4 or 5 of us downstairs. We had closed and cleaned up the kitchen, and we had 2 or 3 of our people, our employees, were working, and Flossie and I and our innkeeper and a couple of people from the neighborhood were over. We were downstairs, and upstairs was empty, and no one was in it. And we heard this loud, thunderous crash, and we all ran upstairs and found a 200-pound shiffer robe had been turned over. There you'd hear footsteps in the building. We had finally, because we only have one at the time, one savings and loan and one bank in the county, we're forced to and we couldn't get adequate financing through either. We were forced to go down to Wilkes County and to talk to the Wilkes Savings and Loan Association people, who were very interested in providing us with adequate financing for the building. And they came up, their entire staff of their office, and the president and his daughter came up for lunch one day, and we had them seated in a dining room, and the president of the Savings and Loan was seated at one end and his daughter was next to him. And throughout the lunch, his daughter was plagued by little gremlins, so to speak. Her placemat kept flittering. There was no wind. The windows were closed. Her sugar packets and matches and things in front of her on the table started bouncing around. She was enveloped in very cold air. She eventually became terrified of all of this, and everybody got up and left, and we never heard from them again. So it has produced a lot of difficulties, but they've never done any harm to it. There are a number of ghosts supposedly inhabiting the place. 3 that we know of, according to the legends in the area. One's a small baby, one's Rosebud, and one is a man that was found dead in the structure. And supposedly their ghosts walk the night in the building.
Well, that was right many, murder, right many happenings for a building in that short a span,
Well, you got to remember, it was the major focal point in the county, and particularly the eastern part of the county, which was the active part, for a long, long time. Everyone met there. People drank there. That was before the Prohibition. And during Prohibition, it was used by local moonshiners to sell their wares and everything else. It was a major place. Nearly all the weddings in the eastern part of the county were held there in what they call the wedding room, which was upstairs. All kinds of community events took place there. This was the only large structure. So it was a major area with, a lot of people in and out of it. And even though it fell on rough times and bad times, it still was a focal point for the residents of the county, and that's probably one of the reasons why, because of the active nature of the people that were in it, that there were that many deaths in the place.
Well, that's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's a fascinating building. It is by far the most fascinating structure in Ashe County. Its history. And its design. It's also fascinating because the state advises that it's the most remarkable thing about it is it's still standing. Of the hundreds of inns that were in North